Welcome to The Details with Elliott, Connie, and Adam Frower. This is a podcast where we examine the intersection between solution-focused brief therapy and current topics going on in the world. And we do this because we genuinely want the world to be a better place. So enjoy and come examine the details with us. I was playing around with social media and just kind of scrolling through my personal Facebook page, and I came across a post that got me to thinking about a very important idea that I want to talk to you about. And the idea is, what is it about new information when it contradicts our previous belief system that makes it hard for us to take on? And I'll give you an example. So as I was scrolling through Facebook yesterday, of somebody I knew in high school, and we're now connected on Facebook, and they posted a picture, an image of Dr. Fauci, accusing him of being like paid by China and being a Russian spy. There's all of these like crazy conspiracy theories about Dr. Fauci, things that have been wildly, profoundly disproven. And he posted them as if they were like facts. And he was like, see, the truth eventually comes out. And even people who have a similar belief system to him politically were commenting on this post saying, that's not true. Here's a link to the actual evidence. Here's the link that demonstrates it's not true. And it was clear that he still believes these things. And it just got me to thinking, we live in a day and age where truth is just a hard idea. We live in a day and age where struggle to find what's accurate. There's low confidence in data these days. And I started wondering, with the pandemic and even in our field, we live in a field where I have heard people say things like solution-focused brief therapy only works as a Band-Aid approach, and solution-focused brief therapy has no evidence support. Solution-focused brief therapy can't help clients that have deep-seated issues. And Adam, you're one of the most prominent researchers in the world and have been a part of projects to disprove those ideas. And I find myself wondering, what is it in the human psyche that causes us not to take on data and allow us to move positions when the data contradicts our previous belief systems?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, really, because one of the things that I've been reading recently is a book called Range by David Epstein. And one of the things that he kind of is building an argument about is that we have kind of two different groups of people. There are some people who are depth people, right? They're really specialized in one specific thing, and they do that one specific thing really, really well. They know all the components about it. And the other group of people are people who are kind of breadth people. These are people who kind of are expansive. They dabble in a bit of everything. And one of the things that he talks about is that oftentimes when we're trying to solve new or innovative problems, which I think kind of is what you're getting on about as far as Dr. Fauci, right? It's this new COVID, doesn't feel new anymore, but COVID is this new thing. And we're trying to figure out how to engage with this new thing to tackle this new problem that we've never encountered before. And one of the things that he talks about is people who have a lot of depth knowledge, oftentimes they struggle to come up with new or innovative ideas. Whereas breadth people make connections between really dissimilar things, and oftentimes something that's working in one arena they employ in a totally different arena, and they make comparisons, or they bring the takeaways over into a new area. And that's how new problems are solved. But as part of this process, one of the things that he talked about is he cited a study from 2017 where researchers in the United States and in Canada, they pulled together people from politically diverse backgrounds. And the people who they pulled together, they were really well educated. They were adults. They held really firm beliefs on one side or the other. And one of the things that they did is they offered to pay these people to look at arguments that would disprove their own perspective, right? And they said, we'll give you money to read articles or research or data that shows that what you believe is actually inaccurate. And it didn't matter which side of the perspective they were on. 2/3 of people turned the money down and would not even engage with the other's information that was possible, not even entertain the idea but wouldn't even look at the information. I think that's really, really telling, right? Is that we're so ingrained, 2/3 of the population, so ingrained in believing what they believe, in specializing in what they specialize, that it's almost as if you can't believe that there's value outside of what you know or value outside of what you believe. And I think so. Your question is, how come? Or what do we do about it? How do we broaden that? And I think it's a big part of it is understanding this concept of getting trapped in our own perspective. I think one of the things that will really help people is simply exposure to difference, having experiences, purposefully entertaining thoughts, ideas, perspectives that are different than your own, looking at news outlets that you wouldn't normally look at, engaging meaningfully with people, not necessarily to be persuaded by someone, but to understand why people believe what they believe.
It's such a crazy phenomenon, Adam. So, you and I have had conversations previously about how our relationship required a bit of open-mindedness. Being totally candid, I probably had some beliefs about people who are of your faith, most commonly known as Mormons. And you may have had some beliefs and thoughts about African Americans. And you and I had to engage in conversations where I would say, like, well, Adam, that's actually not true. That's just a stereotype, blah, blah, blah. And you would tell me, well, Elliott, that's not true about Mormons. That's just a stereotype, blah, blah, blah. How do people acquire open-mindedness? Because Adam, that's an incredible thing that you just said, that 66% of people, when the reward was money, like something that's really awesome and people want, 66% of the people refuse to even participate or engage in the new information.
I think one of the things that I would say is open mindedness is a willingness to engage, right? It's a willingness to openly acknowledge that there is a different perspective. So I think that's the first step, to acknowledge that somebody else may believe something different than you. Somebody else may adhere to a different worldview or life perspective than you. And so I think one, it's so akin to honesty, right? I think oftentimes we live in our bubbles and we think because I think this or believe this, everyone does. And that's a dishonest stance. And so I think open mindedness begins with honesty about ourselves, about our situation, our place in life. So I think it begins with honesty. I think second, it's a willingness, right? It's a desire to understand. And the third thing that I would say is it's actively seeking evidence that you're wrong. And again, willingness to be wrong places us in a place of, again, that humility where we can entertain perhaps my own worldview has become narrowed as a result of my own lived experiences. Open mindedness is not passive, it's not just letting things wash over me. Open mindedness is a very active process of seeking the opposite or seeking something different as a way to understand.
You know what just hit me, Adam? And I think this is interesting and may turn into me challenging our listeners to do something, because something just hit me. You are someone that I think is an active seeker of truth. Even if that truth counters one of your previous beliefs, you are an active seeker of truth. And it makes me wonder, Adam, if some people, like that 66% that refuse to engage in information that may be contradictory to what they believe, are active seekers of comfort. So, for example, if I believe the world is flat, as most people once believed, and you try to show me information that causes me to think the world is in fact round, new information inherently makes me uncomfortable because I have to change and rethink everything I had previously thought. So perhaps the shift, Adam, is we have to encourage people to be seekers of truth instead of seekers of comfort. What do you think about that?
I think that that is true, but I think there's also in some arenas, and again, I think you're right. I do try to seek truth, but I would also say that in some areas, perhaps we see truth differently. What is true or what is impactful, what is a right, what is appropriate for me may not be right or accurate or correct for someone else. And I'm not saying that there isn't big T truth out there, because I think that there are some things that can hold true. But I think our willingness, our ability to engage with that truth, it varies from person to person. And so I think in addition to seeking truth, we need to be seekers of compassion. That if somebody comes to a different conclusion about what truth is, that we acknowledge and accept it's okay that they ended up in a different place than we did. That perhaps with the knowledge or the experience that they've had, that the data or the information makes sense to them in a different way. So I think, yes, we should be pursuers of truth, but I think that we also need to be pursuers of compassion when people determine that truth lies somewhere different than we have determined that it lies.
Yeah, but I think I'm talking about those big T truths, like the world is in fact round. Even now, Adam, there are people that believe differently, right? Or everything you just said, I think, is true and accurate. Like we can both consume the same information and land in two different places because truth is sometimes not, but sometimes truth is truth. Like not all Black people are criminals. That's a truth. There are some people who believe that's true. I remember going to college with a guy, and at the time when I was in college, a movie came out called Higher Learning. And it was a big deal at the time, and we were all going to go to the movie theaters to see it. And this kid wouldn't go. He said, "I'm not going to go see that movie." And I went, "Why not? Why aren't you going to come with us?" And he said, "Because Black people are going to go to that movie theater, and all Black people are criminals." He said it like directly to my face, as if it was fact. And I was like, "But that's not true. Like, I'm not a criminal. Like, what are you talking about?" And he was like, "Well, I come from a place where they told me all Black people are criminals. I don't believe it." And he genuinely had a fear that because the movie Higher Learning, it's like a Black movie, that Black people were going to be in the audience going to the movie, and he would be harmed in an audience full of Black people, because in his head, he was in an audience full of criminals. I think that's more what I'm talking about, is those things that are like, there are facts that contradict that thing you're saying. And we work really hard to hold on to that belief. I was never able to convince him. I lived in an area with him. I was never able to convince him that all Black people weren't criminals.
What I would say about that is he is evidence of someone who is unwilling to be uncomfortable, right? I think in this process, again, you can't just let information wash over you. You have to be an active seeker of knowledge, of experience. And even though he was talking to a Black person who's not a criminal, he wasn't actively seeking to be proven wrong. And I think that we have to be actively seeking information. And I think when people are actively seeking, if they come to a different conclusion, we have to be willing to say, it's okay that you ended up over there. And again, I'm not condoning that he holds on to his belief that all Black people are criminals, because it was not paired with actively seeking to find information or counter arguments to why that might not be true. And so we should be compassionate about his position. We should be seeking to encourage evidence. And if considering the evidence, he comes to a certain conclusion, then we have to be compassionate about the conclusion. But he didn't engage in part one.
Right. I see. Okay, that makes sense. So Adam, look, let's ask all of our listeners to be active engagers in conversations about truth, even if it makes you uncomfortable. And like you're saying, if you actively and with an open mind engage in those conversations and land at a different place, that's okay. But we have to be willing to engage in conversations that might lead us into an uncomfortable place. So I encourage all of you to have conversations about topics that might make you uncomfortable with people who come from a different background or origin than you, but engage, because once you engage, life becomes beautiful.
I just want to point out one thing. You just evidenced what we talked about, right? Where you originally disagreed with me and you said, no, I think this.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, what about this? And you said, okay, yeah, I agree with that. I think that's exactly the way that it's supposed to be done, right? Is that we can take different perspectives, but we also need to actively engage in conversation and be willing to have our opinions changed.
That's absolutely right. If we lived in a world where people were willing to have their opinions changed by information, I'm not sure we'd be where we are politically with these extraordinarily divisive positions. And I'm not sure the pandemic would be wreaking the kind of havoc that it has done globally, because we should be open-minded enough to move our positions in the face of data. So that's why I think it's so important that you guys listening, you take that on and you be willing to be uncomfortable to just at least listen to counter arguments with an open mind. And if you listen to counter arguments with an open mind, you land in a different place, so be it. But at least we should listen to counter arguments with an open mind and be available to say things like, oh, that makes sense. I hadn't thought about that before. Now my position has changed.
This podcast was brought to you by the Solution Focused Universe, which is the largest online training community dedicated to the solution-focused approach and the growth of professionals interested in mastering the solution-focused approach. And brought to you by Solution Focused Notes, which is the only online electronic health record system dedicated to solution-focused professionals, where they can find templates to use treatment plans, progress notes, intake forms, everything you need to run a practice electronically, calendar, your charting system, and all of it tailored to the needs of solution-focused professionals.